Wealthy father sees waitress's gesture with special needs. Son does the unthinkable. Richard Thompson was on the verge of a nervous breakdown in the middle of the most exclusive restaurant in New York City. His 10-year-old son, Nathan's meltdown was drawing disapproving glances from other patrons as he tried in vain to calm the boy. That's when Jessica, a 28-year-old waitress, approached with surprising calm. Without asking permission, she knelt beside the boy and began whispering sweet words, making gentle circular motions on his back. To Richard's astonishment, in less than 2 minutes, Nathan had completely calmed down. "How did you do that?" Richard asked, still processing what had just happened. Jessica smiled faintly. "Just a technique I learned. Your son will be fine now. Can I bring him some passion fruit juice? It helps him relax." Before Richard could respond, she had already walked away, returning to her duties as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The businessman spent the rest of the meal watching the waitress, who worked with impressive dedication, but always found a few seconds to smile at Nathan as she passed their table. When it was time to pay the bill, Richard left a generous tip. He hoped to talk to Jessica more to thank her properly, but the restaurant was packed, and she barely had time to wave goodbye as they left. The whole ride home in the comfort of his Range Rover, Richard couldn't stop thinking about the waitress and the incredible way she had helped Nathan. Ever since his wife, Melissa, had left them 3 years ago, he had struggled daily to understand and meet his son's special needs. He had hired a team of expensive specialists, but none of them had connected with the boy the way that simple waitress had in just minutes. "Nathan, did you like the lady at the restaurant?" Richard asked, glancing in the rearview mirror at his son, who was quietly playing with his stuffed dinosaur in the back seat. To his surprise, Nathan looked up and smiled, something he rarely did with strangers. "She smells like flowers," and the boy replied before turning his attention back to his toy. That simple observation was enough for Richard to make a decision. The next day, he would return to the restaurant to speak with Jessica. The Monarch didn't open for lunch, so Richard had to wait until late afternoon. Dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, he entered the establishment as soon as the doors opened at 6 p.m. The maitre d' recognized him immediately. "Mr. Thompson, what a pleasure to have you back. Your usual table is available." "Thank you, George, but I'm not here to dine today. I'd like to speak with one of the waitresses who worked here last night. Her name is Jessica." The maitre d's expression changed instantly, discomfort washing over his face. "I'm sorry to inform you that Jessica no longer works here." "Sir?" Richard felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. "What do you mean? She was here yesterday." "There was an incident. Management decided she wasn't a good fit for the establishment's standards." A growing unease settled over Richard. He knew this kind of situation all too well. As the owner of one of the country's largest construction firms, he'd seen employees fired for questionable reasons before. What kind of incident? The maitre d' hesitated, glancing around nervously. "Mr. Thompson, perhaps it's best we speak privately." Richard was led to a small back room in the restaurant. There, he learned Jessica had been fired for paying too much attention to customers and interfering in matters beyond her role, a direct reference to what had happened with Nathan. "You fired her for helping my son." The indignation in Richard's voice was palpable. "Sir, we understand your frustration, but we have protocols. Our employees are instructed to maintain professional distance and—" "I want her address," Richard interrupted. "Unfortunately, I cannot provide personal information about our former employees. It would be unethical and—" Richard pulled out his wallet and placed a stack of bills on the table. "I'm not asking, I'm demanding. That woman was wronged because of me, and I intend to make it right." An hour later, Richard parked his Range Rover in front of a modest housing complex on the outskirts of New York City. The contrast between the luxurious vehicle and the simple buildings around it couldn't have been starker. Some children stopped playing ball in the street to admire the car, while a few adults watched him with suspicion. With the address in hand, Richard walked up to the 3rd floor of one of the buildings. He hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door of apartment 302. What would he say to her? How would he explain his presence there? Before he could organize his thoughts, the door opened. Jessica appeared wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, so different from the formal restaurant uniform. Her eyes widened in recognition and surprise. "Mr. Thompson, what are you doing here?" Before Richard could answer, a noise from inside the apartment caught his attention. A boy of about 8 appeared behind Jessica. He was flapping his hands repeatedly and making a rhythmic sound with his mouth, behaviors Richard knew all too well. "Your son?" Richard asked, though he already knew the answer. Jessica nodded, placing a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. "This is Tyler. Tyler, say hello to Mr. Thompson." The boy didn't make eye contact but gave a small wave. "He's on the spectrum too, isn't he?" Richard asked softly. Jessica seemed surprised for a moment, then sighed. "Yes, he was diagnosed at 3. That's why..." She hesitated. "That's why I knew how to help your son yesterday." A silence settled between them, heavy with mutual understanding. Finally, Richard spoke. "I heard you were fired. Because of me." Jessica shook her head, a sad smile on her lips. "It wasn't your fault. I was already on thin ice there. Too involved with the customers, according to them. Apparently, waitresses are supposed to be invisible, just serve and disappear." "It's unfair," Richard said, anger evident in his voice. "That's life," she replied with a resignation that struck him. "I'll find another job, I always do." Richard glanced around the small apartment. It was clean and tidy, but signs of financial struggle were everywhere. Worn furniture, walls in need of paint, clearly second-hand toys. "Jessica, I came here to make you an offer." She raised an eyebrow, wary. "What kind of offer?" "I want to hire you as a therapeutic companion for Nathan." Jessica's face registered a mix of emotions: surprise, suspicion, hope, and finally concern. "Mr. Thompson, I don't have the training for that. I'm not a therapist, or yesterday you did in 2 minutes what expensive therapists..." "Haven't managed in months," Richard interrupted. "You have something you can't learn in universities, and Nathan responded to you." Jessica looked at Tyler, who was now sitting on the living room floor, carefully lining up a collection of toy cars by size. "What about my son?" "I can't leave him." "He can come too," Richard replied immediately. "I have plenty of space. You'd live with us in the guest room of the mansion. Tyler could keep his normal routine, go to school, and you'd take care of Nathan." Jessica blinked several times, as if checking whether she was dreaming. "You barely know me." "I know enough," replied Richard, with a conviction that surprised even himself. "I saw how you treated my son, how you reached him when no one else could. That's all I need to know." Jessica still seemed hesitant. What would the terms be, the salary?" Richard mentioned a figure that made Jessica's eyes widen. That's more than I made in 3 months at the restaurant." "It's what it's worth to me to see my son happy," Richard replied simply. Jessica asked for time to think, and Richard respected that. They exchanged phone numbers, and he promised to call the next day for her answer. Before leaving, he turned to take one last look at the modest apartment, feeling an odd connection to the place. It reminded him of his own childhood, in a home not so different, before his father made his fortune in construction. The next day, Jessica accepted the offer. A week later, she and Tyler moved into the Thompson mansion in the Upper East Side, one of New York City's most exclusive neighborhoods. Everyone's lives were about to change forever. The first days in the mansion were a mix of wonder and discomfort for Jessica and Tyler. The 15,000-square-foot home, with its pool, garden, home theater, and even a small golf course, was a world apart from the 2-bedroom apartment they were used to. At first, Tyler struggled to adjust. Children with autism often react poorly to sudden changes in routine, and moving to the mansion was a drastic shift in his environment. For the first few nights he cried, asking to go home, meaning their old apartment. Jessica also felt out of place. The mansion's staff, butler, chef, gardener, and 2 maids treated her with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. To them, it was odd that the boss had brought a former waitress to live in the main house instead of placing her in the staff quarters at the back of the property. Nathan, however, responded surprisingly well to Jessica's presence. From the very first day, he showed an openness to interacting with her that he had never shown with other caregivers. Though he still struggled with prolonged eye contact and verbalizing his needs, He allowed Jessica to approach and even touch him, something rare for a child with his level of tactile sensitivity. Richard watched everything with a mix of hope and skepticism. Part of him still couldn't believe he had brought a complete stranger into his home based on just one positive interaction with his son. But another part, the part that had grown up in humble conditions and still remembered what it was like to struggle, recognized in Jessica a strength and dignity that moved him. For the first week, Richard kept his distance, leaving early for work and returning only after Nathan was asleep. Thompson Construction was in the middle of an important negotiation for a luxury residential complex, and he used it as an excuse to stay away, observing Jessica and Tyler's integration from afar. It was on Sunday, when he was finally home, all day, that Richard witnessed something that would change his perspective forever. Jessica had taken Nathan and Tyler out to the garden. It was a sunny day, and she had set up an improvised sensory circuit with simple objects, different fabric textures spread on the ground, a bowl of soapy water for blowing bubbles, and some fruits to explore contrasting flavors. Richard watched, discreetly from the patio, pretending to read the newspaper. He saw the moment Jessica knelt beside Nathan and gently guided his hands to touch a piece of velvet. "Look, Nathan, how soft it is. It's like your stuffed cat's fur, remember?" To Richard's surprise, Nathan not only allowed the touch, but smiled, a rare expression for his usually neutral face. "Now, how about we try something different?" Jessica continued, picking up a piece of very fine sandpaper. "This is rough. Rough is the opposite of soft." Tyler, who had been busy blowing soap bubbles until then, came closer. "Can I show him, Aunt Jessica?" the boy asked. Jessica smiled and nodded. "Of course, Tyler. Just remember to ask for permission first." Tyler turned to Nathan, keeping a respectful distance. "Nathan, can I show you something cool?" To Richard's absolute astonishment, Nathan nodded and reached out his hand to Tyler. The older boy smiled and gently guided Nathan's hand first over the velvet, then over the sandpaper. "See? Soft and rough, different, but both feel nice." Nathan repeated the motion on his own, seeming genuinely interested in the sensory experience. "Soft and rough," he repeated, the words clear and distinct, something Richard rarely heard when his son spoke to strangers or even to him. Richard felt a lump in his throat. In just a few days, Jessica had not only connected with Nathan, but also facilitated a social interaction between the two children, something all the specialists had said was extremely difficult for children on the autism spectrum. In that moment, he knew he had made the right decision. And for the first time since Melissa had left them, Richard felt a small flame of hope ignite in his heart. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, the following weeks brought a gradual but significant transformation to the Thompson mansion. Jessica established regular schedules for Nathan's activities, creating the predictable structure that children with autism so desperately need. Slowly, Richard began to get more involved, adjusting his work hours so he could have dinner with his son and participate in some of the activities Jessica organized. One evening, after putting Nathan to bed, Jessica found Richard in the living room, working on his laptop even at that late hour. "Mr. Thompson?" she called softly. "Jessica, please, I've asked you to call me Richard," he replied, closing the computer. "Is something wrong with Nathan?" "No, he's sleeping soundly. Actually, I wanted to talk about something else." Richard gestured for her to sit on the sofa across from him. Jessica hesitated for a moment before settling in. "I've been observing Nathan's routine and noticed something you might not have realized." "What?" "Nathan misses you," Jessica said plainly. "He always looks at the door around the times you usually come home. When you call to say you'll be late, I can see the disappointment on his face, even if he doesn't say it." Richard felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. The guilt, always lurking in the back of his mind, surged forward with full force. "I'm doing the best I can," he said defensively. "I have a company to run, employees who depend on me. I can't just—" "I understand," Jessica interrupted gently. "I'm not judging. I just thought you should know. Nathan notices more than We realize. Richard sighed, rubbing his face with his hands. What do you suggest? Small changes, Jessica replied. A set time to come home 3 days a week, no exceptions. One full Sunday dedicated just to him. No work, no phone calls. Maybe even joining his therapy sessions occasionally. Richard looked at her with a mix of respect and discomfort. No one since Melissa had spoken to him so directly about his relationship with Nathan. I'll try, he promised, surprising himself, with the sincerity in his voice. Jessica smiled, that warm smile that had first caught his attention at the restaurant. That's all I ask. In the following weeks, Richard kept his promise. He rescheduled meetings, delegated some responsibilities, and carved out time in his busy schedule to be present in his son's life. The results were almost immediate. Nathan began smiling more, making eye contact for longer periods and even verbalizing his wants and needs more often. One afternoon, as they returned from a walk in the garden, a new routine they had established, Nathan unexpectedly took Richard's hand. "Dad, will you stay?" the boy asked, looking at the ground. "Stay what, son?" "Stay here. Don't go away." Richard felt his heart tighten. He knelt to meet his son's eye level. "Nathan, look at me," he said gently. When the boy finally raised his gaze, Richard continued, "I'll always come back. Always. Do you understand?" Nathan nodded hesitantly. "Like Mom?" The question caught Richard off guard. Melissa was rarely mentioned in the house, an unspoken agreement to avoid the pain of rejection. "No, son, not like Mom. I'll never leave you." Nathan's eyes shone with an understanding that surprised Richard. For a moment, he glimpsed the vast inner world of his son, often hidden behind his difficulty in communicating. "Promise?" Nathan asked. "I promise," Richard replied, feeling the weight of those words. Nathan then smiled, a full, genuine smile. Richard rarely saw, "Okay, can we get ice cream now?" Richard laughed, relieved by the change of subject. "Of course. Let's call Tyler and Jessica too." As they walked back to the house, Richard reflected on how much his life had changed in such a short time. For the first time in years, he felt truly present, not just physically, but emotionally connected to his son. However, this newfound peace would be abruptly shattered the next morning when Melissa Thompson, Richard's ex-wife and Nathan's mother, unexpectedly appeared at the mansion's gate, demanding entry. The butler, James, was the first to spot her on the security cameras. Hesitating for a moment, he finally decided to inform Richard, who was having breakfast with Jessica, Tyler, and Nathan. "Mr. Thompson, forgive the interruption," James said, with obvious discomfort. "But Ms. Melissa is at the gate. She insists on seeing you." Richard froze, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. Jessica immediately sensed the tension and shot a worried glance at Nathan, who luckily seemed absorbed in his cereal. "Tell her I'm busy," Richard replied coldly. "I tried, sir, but she's quite insistent. She threatened to call the press." Richard set his cup down harder than he intended, startling Nathan. "Sorry," he murmured, gently touching his son's shoulder. "It's okay, Nathan. Finish your breakfast." Turning to Jessica, he added quietly, "Can you take him upstairs when he's done? I have something to handle." Jessica nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Let's do that soap and food coloring experiment you liked, Nathan," she said cheerfully, trying to distract the boy. "And Tyler can help us mix the colors." Richard gave her a grateful look before following James to the mansion's entrance. In his office, he quickly checked the security feed. There stood Melissa, as elegant as ever in an expensive dress, large sunglasses hiding part of her face, her long blonde hair perfectly styled. 3 years had passed, but she remained practically the same, at least on the outside. "Let her in," Richard ordered the security guard through the intercom, "and bring her straight to my office." As he waited, Richard tried to control the storm of emotions raging inside him. Anger, hurt, distrust, but also a strange sense of relief that he could finally close that chapter of his life. Over the past few years, their only contact had been through lawyers, during the divorce and the custody battle for Nathan. A battle Melissa had practically abandoned midway, surrendering all her rights in exchange for a generous alimony. A soft knock on the door announced her arrival. Richard took a deep breath, composed his expression into the neutral mask he wore during tough negotiations, and said, "Come in." Melissa entered as if she still owned the place, with the same confidence that had always defined her. She removed her sunglasses, revealing the same intense green eyes Nathan had inherited. "Richard," she greeted him with a faint smile. "It's been a while." "What do you want, Melissa?" he asked bluntly, not bothering to stand. "Not even a how are you?" she replied, feigning hurt as she sat down uninvited. "I see the years haven't softened your temper. I don't have time for games. Just tell me why you're here." Melissa crossed her legs elegantly, adjusting the hem of her dress. "I came to see my son, of course." Richard felt his blood boil. "Your son? The same one you abandoned 3 years ago because you couldn't handle a defective child?" He quoted the exact words she had used when she left. A fleeting look of shame crossed Melissa's face, but it was quickly replaced by her usual controlled expression. "I made mistakes, Richard. I was scared, confused. Nathan's diagnosis. It was a shock. I wasn't prepared. And now you are." "I'm a different person now," she said, leaning forward. "I've been in therapy. I've learned about autism. I realize I reacted badly, out of ignorance and fear. I want a second chance with my son." Richard let out a bitter laugh. "A second chance? Melissa, you didn't call once in 3 years. No birthday gifts, no asking how he was doing. And now you want a second chance?" "I know it sounds absurd," she admitted, and for the first time, Richard detected what seemed like sincerity in her voice. "But I never stopped thinking about him, never stopped regretting. I just didn't know how to come back, how to make things right." "And why now?" Melissa hesitated, as if carefully choosing her words. "I recently returned to the United States. I was in Europe all these years, trying to find my way. When I came back, I saw a photo of you and Nathan in a magazine. He looked so grown, up, so handsome. I realized everything I was missing." Richard studied her closely, trying to discern the truth behind her words. Melissa had always been an excellent actress. It was one of the qualities that had first drawn him to her, and later became a constant source of distrust. "Nathan is doing well," he said finally. "Better than ever, actually. He has a stable routine, is making progress in therapy, and has started communicating more." "I'm glad to hear that," Melissa said, a gentle smile on her lips. "So can I see him?" "No," Richard replied immediately. "Not now. Maybe never." Melissa's smile vanished. "Richard, I'm his mother. I have rights." "Rights?" Richard's voice rose an octave. "You gave up all your rights when you signed those papers, remember? I relinquished custody in exchange for the agreed-upon alimony. Your words, not mine. I was confused, poorly advised. My lawyer at the time—" "Your lawyer was one of the best in the country," Richard interrupted. "And you knew exactly what you were doing." A tense silence fell over the room. Finally, Melissa sighed. "I didn't come here to fight, Richard. I came because I want to be part of my son's life again. Gradually, of course. I know it will be a process." Richard studied her for a long moment. Something didn't add up. Melissa had never been sentimental, always calculating and pragmatic. This sudden maternal regret seemed out of character. "Why now, Melissa?" he repeated. "What's the real reason?" A flash of irritation crossed Melissa's eyes. "I told you, I want to reconnect with my—" "No, that's not it," Richard interrupted. I know you too well. There's something else." For a moment, Melissa's mask seemed to waver. Then, with a defeated sigh, she leaned back in her chair. "Fine. There's a business opportunity I'm considering. An investor interested in expanding into the United States." He hesitated when he learned about my complicated family history. Now we're getting somewhere," Richard said, a humorless smile on his lips. "Go on." "It's not what you think," Melissa defended. "Yes, it made me reflect on my choices. But my desire to reconnect with Nathan is genuine. And how much of this reconnection would satisfy your investor? A few happy mother-son photos? A touching family reconciliation story for the magazines? Melissa had the decency to look ashamed. Don't be cynical, Richard. People change. I've changed. Before Richard could respond, a soft knock interrupted them. Jessica appeared, looking apologetic. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Thompson, but Nathan is asking for you. He seems a little unsettled. Melissa turned sharply, eyeing Jessica with obvious surprise, then curiosity. And who might you be? She asked, a touch of arrogance in her voice. Jessica Parker, Nathan's therapeutic aide, Jessica replied with professional calm, though Richard could sense her discomfort. Therapeutic aide, Melissa repeated, arching a perfectly sculpted brow. Interesting. I didn't realize Richard was hiring such young staff. The insinuating tone wasn't lost on anyone. Richard felt a surge of irritation. Jessica, please tell Nathan I'll be with him shortly, he said, keeping his voice steady. And ask James to prepare the car. Ms. Melissa will be leaving now. Not so fast, Melissa protested. We haven't finished our conversation. Yes, we have, Richard stated, standing. My son needs me now and he's my priority. If you truly want to reconnect with Nathan, it'll be on my terms. Talk to my lawyer. Melissa rose as well, her composure slipping. You can't keep me from seeing my son, Richard. Legally, I can, and I will until I'm sure your intentions are genuine. Melissa's eyes narrowed. You'll regret this. Not as much as you regret abandoning us, Richard replied calmly. Jessica, please, escort Ms. Melissa out? Jessica nodded, though she seemed uneasy with the task. This way, ma'am. Melissa shot Richard one last furious look before following Jessica, her stiff posture betraying her anger. When the door closed behind them, Richard sank into his chair, emotionally drained. He knew this wasn't the end. He knew Melissa too well to believe she'd give up easily. And now Jessica was caught in the middle. Jessica, who in such a short time had become indispensable to their lives. With a deep sigh, Richard stood. Nathan was waiting and he'd promised to be there. It was a promise he intended to keep, no matter what storms Melissa might bring. In the days that followed, the Thompson mansion seemed wrapped in a palpable tension. Richard increased security, instructing the guards not to allow Melissa under any circumstances. He also contacted his lawyer, anticipating possible legal actions his ex-wife might take. Jessica noticed the shift in the atmosphere, but remained focused on her main mission, ensuring Nathan continued his routine normally, shielded from the emotional turmoil around him. She observed, however, that Richard was more distant, spending long hours in his office, often on the phone with urgent whispers. One evening, after putting the children to bed, Jessica decided to confront him. She found Richard in the library, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring intently at the lit fireplace. "May I come in?" she asked softly. Richard looked up, momentarily surprised, as if he'd forgotten there were other people in the house. "Of course, Jessica. Is there a problem with Nathan?" "No, he's sleeping soundly," she replied, stepping closer. "Actually, I came to see if there's a problem with you." Richard gave a sad smile. "That obvious?" "To anyone paying attention, yes," Jessica answered, sitting in the armchair across from him. "Is it about your ex-wife's visit?" "Partly," Richard admitted, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Melissa has always been unpredictable and determined. When she wants something, she stops at nothing to get it. And what do you think she really wants?" Richard sighed deeply. "At first, I thought it was just about the investor, a renewed public image. But now, I'm not sure. My lawyer informed me she hired one of the most aggressive law firms in the city. She's talking about revisiting custody." Jessica paled. Could she actually get that after abandoning him? "Legally, it's complicated. The agreement we made was quite clear, but she's claiming she was under extreme emotional stress at the time, that she didn't receive proper legal counsel. It's all nonsense, of course, but it could complicate things. And dragging Nathan into the middle of a legal battle is the last thing I want. What will you do?" Richard looked at Jessica with an intensity that made her blush slightly. "Protect my son at all costs. Nathan is finally making progress, opening up, forming connections. I won't let Melissa destroy that on a whim or for her own interests. Have you considered maybe allowing some supervised visits? Jessica suggested cautiously, just to see how Nathan reacts to her. Richard frowned. You think I should give in? It's not about giving in, Jessica explained. It's about giving Nathan the chance to form his own opinion about his mother. He's more perceptive than we think. Despite his communication challenges, if Melissa isn't sincere, he'll probably sense it. Richard considered the suggestion silently for a few moments. You're right, he finally admitted. As always, I don't know how you do it. Do what? See situations so clearly. Find the most humane approach. Jessica smiled shyly. Maybe because I'm not as emotionally involved as you are. A comfortable silence settled between them. Richard discreetly studied Jessica, noticing how the firelight danced on her face, highlighting her delicate features. There was something about her, a mix of strength and kindness that intrigued him more and more. You never told me how you ended up as a waitress, he said suddenly. It seems a waste of talent. Jessica shrugged, a casual gesture that didn't match the sudden tension in her eyes. Life doesn't always go the way we plan. I was in college studying psychology when Tyler was diagnosed. His needs became my priority. I had to drop out of school to take care of him full-time and work flexible hours. And Tyler's father? A bitter smile crossed Jessica's lips. He decided he wasn't ready for a complicated child. He went out to buy cigarettes and never came back. Richard nodded, recognizing the painfully familiar story. At least he was honest from the start, Jessica continued. He didn't wait years to realize he couldn't handle the situation. The comment, though not directed at him, struck Richard like an arrow. It was true. Despite all the resentment he felt toward Melissa, at least she had been honest about her inability to be a mother to a child with special needs. I almost gave up too, Richard confessed quietly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. In the beginning, when the diagnosis came, I was overwhelmed, confused. Thompson Construction was going through a crisis. Melissa had left. There were moments when I thought Nathan would be better off without me. Jessica looked at him without judgment, only understanding. But you stayed. I did, Richard confirmed, because he's my son. And because deep down I knew I could do better. Be better. And you are, Jessica said with conviction. Nathan is lucky to have you as his father. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something indefinable passed between them. Richard felt a sudden urge to move closer, to take Jessica's hands in his. But the moment was interrupted by the sharp ring of the phone. Richard answered, his expression shifting quickly from surprise to worry, and finally to anger. How is this possible? He asked tensely. Yes, I understand. I'll be there first thing tomorrow. When he hung up, his face was pale. What happened? Jessica asked, alarmed. It was my lawyer. Melissa somehow managed to get a preliminary hearing for custody review. And there's more. She's claiming the current home environment is inappropriate. Inappropriate. What does that mean? Richard swallowed hard. She's using you. Against me, Jessica. Insinuating there's an inappropriate relationship between us, that I'm prioritizing my romantic interests over Nathan's well-being. Jessica was stunned. That's ridiculous. There's nothing between us. I'm only here to help Nathan. I know that, Richard said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. But Melissa is crafting a narrative, and unfortunately, she's always been very good at that. Jessica stood up, determination on her face. Then we'll create our own narrative, the true one. I have detailed records of all Nathan's progress over the last few weeks. I can prepare a report, include photos, videos. Richard watched, her with growing admiration. Where others saw only obstacles, Jessica saw solutions. You'd do that? Of course, she replied without hesitation. For Nathan, and for you too. Their eyes met again, and this time, the connection between them was undeniable. But both knew this wasn't the moment to explore whatever was blossoming there. Nathan was the priority, and now more than ever, they needed to stand together to protect him. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week. In the days leading up to it, Richard and Jessica worked tirelessly, preparing documentation, meeting with specialists who could testify about Nathan's progress, all while trying to keep the boys' routine as normal as possible. Tyler, sensing the tension, surprisingly became an ally, keeping Nathan distracted with games and activities. The two children had developed a special friendship, communicating in a way that sometimes seemed almost telepathic. On the eve of the EY hearing, Richard found Jessica in the kitchen late at night. Both were exhausted but determined. "Everything is ready," she said, closing a folder full of documents. "If the judge has even a shred of common sense, she'll see that Nathan is thriving here." Richard nodded, grateful for her confidence. "Jessica, no matter what happens tomorrow, I want you to know I can never thank you enough for everything you've done. You've changed our lives." Jessica smiled, though her eyes betrayed worry. "You've changed mine too. And Tyler's." A comfortable silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Richard spoke. "After all this is over, when things calm down, maybe we can talk about the future." Jessica's heart raced, but before she could respond, Richard's phone rang. It was his lawyer with last-minute news that would completely alter the course of the battle ahead. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out." Now continuing. The next morning, Richard and Jessica arrived at the courthouse with determined expressions. Richard, impeccable in his dark suit, looked every bit the confident executive the business world knew. But Jessica, who now knew him better, could see the tension in his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands that he tried to hide. The information his lawyer had shared the night before was explosive. Melissa wasn't acting alone in her scheme. There was a man behind it all, Maxwell Carter, a rival businessman to Richard, interested in acquiring part of Thompson Construction. Apparently, Melissa and Maxwell had met in London months earlier, and he saw in her the perfect opportunity to pressure Richard. The plan was simple and cruel: use Nathan as leverage. If Melissa could secure at least shared custody, she'd have some power over Richard, influencing business decisions in Maxwell's favor. It was a low blow, but clever. When they entered the courtroom, Melissa was already there, elegant in a subtle navy blue ensemble that made her look like a devoted professional mother. Beside her, an aggressive-looking lawyer organized stacks of documents. The judge, Patricia Wilson, a middle-aged woman with a stern expression and sharp eyes, entered the room and everyone rose. "Preliminary hearing for custody agreement review, Case Thompson," she announced, taking her seat. "I see Ms. Melissa Thompson is requesting a revision of the previous agreement. Mr. Thompson is contesting, correct?" Both lawyers confirmed. "Before we begin, I want to make something very clear," the judge continued, looking directly at Melissa and then at Richard. "This court has no interest in personal vendettas or strategic maneuvers. Our only concern is the well-being of the child in question. Understood?" Everyone nodded. "Good. Ms. Thompson, your petition claims there's been a substantial change in circumstances justifying custody revision. Can you elaborate?" Melissa's lawyer stood. "Certainly, Your Honor. When my client agreed to the current arrangement, she was under extreme emotional distress. Her son's recent diagnosis, combined with Mr. Thompson's pressure for her to relinquish custody, resulted in a decision she deeply regrets. Over the past 3 years, Ms. Thompson has sought professional help, educated herself about autism, and is now fully prepared to resume her maternal role." "And what about the claim of an inappropriate environment?" the judge questioned. "Yes, Your Honor. Recently, Mr. Thompson hired a young woman with no professional qualifications to live in his residence, supposedly as Nathan's therapeutic companion. This woman, Jessica Parker, has no formal training in the field, is not registered with any professional board, and brought her own son to live in the house. We believe there is a romantic relationship between her and Mr. Thompson, placing his personal needs above Nathan's well-being." Jessica felt her face burn with indignation. The description made her seem like an opportunist who had infiltrated Richard's home for her own gain. "Mr. Thompson, your response?" asked the judge. Richard's lawyer, Mr. Daniel Robertson, a man with a calm demeanor who exuded competence, stood up. "Your Honor, Ms. Thompson's allegations are not only false but also offensive. First, regarding the emotional stress cited, we have here the transcript from the mediation conducted before the custody agreement, where Ms. Thompson herself states, and I quote, "I have no interest in raising a disabled child. I prefer to receive the agreed-upon alimony and move on with my life." This statement was made in the presence of both attorneys and the court mediator. Melissa shifted uncomfortably in her seat. As for Ms. Jessica Parker, the lawyer continued, she was hired as a therapeutic companion after demonstrating exceptional ability to communicate with Nathan. And contrary to what has been suggested, this decision resulted in significant progress for the child, as attested by the reports from the official therapist still treating Nathan. The judge nodded, flipping through the documents in front of her. "I have these reports here. Remarkable improvement in communication and social skills over the past 2 months." "Exactly, Your Honor. And we have something further to present." Mr. Robertson signaled, and an assistant entered with a sealed envelope. "Yesterday we received information that casts serious doubt on Ms. Thompson's true motivations. Here we have records of meetings between her and Mr. Maxwell Carter, Mr. Thompson's primary competitor in the construction industry. Mr. Carter has expressed interest in acquiring part of Thompson Construction, something Mr. Thompson has consistently refused." A murmur spread through the room. Melissa visibly paled. "And how is this relevant?" asked the judge, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. "We are presenting the theory, Your Honor, that Ms. Thompson's sudden maternal concern is, in fact, part of a corporate strategy. By obtaining some form of custody over Nathan, she would gain bargaining power over Mr. Thompson, potentially influencing business decisions." Melissa's lawyer stood up furiously. "This is absurd, Your Honor. A baseless conspiracy theory meant to distract from the central issue, a mother wanting to reconnect with her son." The judge raised her hand, silencing him. "I will review this evidence. In the meantime, there is one person in this room whose opinion we have yet to hear, someone with deep knowledge of Nathan's current situation. Ms. Parker, would you please step forward?" Jessica felt every eye turn to her as she walked to the judge's bench. She was nervous but determined to defend the truth. "Ms. Parker, I understand you have no formal training as a therapist, is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor. I was studying psychology when my son was diagnosed with autism. I had to drop out to care for him full-time." "And how did you end up working for Mr. Thompson?" Jessica recounted honestly the incident at the restaurant, the unfair dismissal, and how Richard had sought her out afterward. "Ms. Parker, is there a romantic relationship between you and Mr. Thompson?" Jessica flushed slightly but kept her gaze steady. "No, Your Honor. My relationship with Mr. Thompson is strictly professional. I am in that house to help Nathan, and any suggestion otherwise is simply false. In your professional opinion, and here I refer to your experience as the mother of a child with autism and as Nathan's caregiver, what would be the impact of an abrupt change in his routine?" At this moment, Jessica took a deep breath before answering. "It would be devastating, Your Honor. Children with autism rely deeply on predictable routines. Nathan is finally making connections, expressing himself, trusting, introducing his mother, a virtual stranger to him after 3 years, as a constant presence, or worse, removing Nathan from his familiar environment, could undo all the progress we've made. And if the reintroduction were gradual, with supervised visits, for example, that would be acceptable, as long as it's carefully monitored and structured to respect Nathan's needs." The judge nodded, seeming satisfied with the balanced response. "Thank you, Ms. Parker. You may sit down." The hearing continued for another hour, with additional testimonies and evidence presented. Finally, the judge announced her preliminary decision. "After considering all the evidence presented, I rule that primary custody of Nathan Thompson will remain with his father, Richard Thompson. However, I acknowledge the mother's right to seek reconnection with her son, provided it is done responsibly, and with consideration for the child's specific needs." Melissa smiled, interpreting this as a partial victory. But the judge wasn't finished. Therefore, I order a 3-month period of supervised visits, once a week, lasting 2 hours each. These visits will take place at Mr. Thompson's residence, with the presence of Ms. Parker, whose continued role as Nathan's therapeutic companion is approved by this court. At the end of this period, we will reassess the situation. The judge looked sternly at Melissa. And Ms. Thompson, I must warn you, I have serious concerns about your motivations in this case. If at any point I perceive that you are using your son as a pawn in some kind of corporate game, I will not hesitate to revoke even this limited visitation right. Are we clear? Melissa nodded, her expression tense. Court adjourned, concluded the judge, banging the gavel. As they left the courtroom, Richard and Jessica exchanged a relieved glance. The battle wasn't completely won, but they had secured a significant victory. Nathan would stay with them, safe in his familiar environment, as they faced the next challenge, Melissa's supervised visits. What neither of them noticed as they walked to the car was the look of pure fury Melissa shot their way, or the quick call she made as soon as she was alone. "Maxwell, it's Melissa. We need Plan B, now." The following weeks brought a new dynamic to the Thompson mansion. Melissa's supervised visits began as ordered by the court. To everyone's surprise, she seemed genuinely interested in getting to know Nathan, always arriving on time, bringing appropriate gifts, clearly researched to suit the specific interests of children with autism, and showing patience during difficult interactions. At first, Nathan was reserved and confused. Though Richard and Jessica had explained who Melissa was, the concept of a mother who had been absent was hard for him to grasp. In the early visits, he stayed close to Jessica, occasionally glancing at Richard for reassurance. To her credit, Melissa didn't force closeness. She followed Jessica's guidance on how to interact with Nathan, keeping her voice soft, respecting his personal space, and letting him set the pace of their interaction. "He likes dinosaurs," Jessica suggested during the third visit when the silence grew uncomfortable. "Maybe you could sort them together." Melissa nodded gratefully and pulled out some dinosaur figures she had brought from her bag. "Nathan, could you help me organize these dinosaurs? I don't know which is which," she said softly. To everyone's surprise, Nathan approached, sitting at a safe distance but willing to participate. "This is a triceratops," he said, pointing to one of the figures. "Herbivore, 3 horns." "3 horns, of course," Melissa smiled. "And this one?" "T-Rex, carnivore, small arms." The session continued like this, with Nathan gradually relaxing in Melissa's presence. When the visit ended, he even waved goodbye, a huge improvement considering his initial discomfort. After Melissa left, Richard and Jessica exchanged bewildered glances. "That was unexpectedly good," Richard remarked. "Yes," Jessica agreed. Though her tone held some reservation, she seems to be genuinely trying. "But," Jessica hesitated, "I don't know. Something doesn't feel completely sincere. Maybe it's just my natural distrust." Richard nodded, understanding. He himself wavered between wanting to believe in Melissa's transformation and suspecting her true intentions. Meanwhile, in the corporate world, a storm was brewing. Thompson Construction faced a sudden wave of problems. A major investor withdrew support without explanation. Rumors surfaced about questionable labor practices at one of their construction sites. An important government contract was mysteriously cancelled. Richard found himself torn between addressing the growing demands of his struggling company and keeping his commitment to being present for Nathan. Nights turned into extended sessions with his executive team, trying to contain the damage, while his days were dedicated to maintaining stability for his son. The stress began affecting his relationship with Jessica. Small irritations, tense, silences during dinner, disagreements about how to approach Nathan. The external pressure was finding outlets at home. One particularly difficult night, after learning the company's stock had dropped 15% in a single day, Richard came home to find Nathan in the middle of a meltdown. The boy was on the living room floor, rocking back and forth, letting out a high-pitched sound of distress as Jessica tried to calm him. "What happened?" Richard asked, dropping his briefcase and kneeling beside his son. I'm not sure, Jessica replied, looking exhausted. He was fine during dinner, but then he started getting agitated. He kept asking what time you'd be home. When it got past 9, he spiraled. Richard felt a wave of guilt. He had promised Nathan he'd be home for dinner, but an emergency meeting with investors had run late. "Nathan, buddy, I'm here now," he said gently, trying to touch the boy's shoulder. Nathan jerked away violently. "You promised," he shouted, the words distorted by anguish. "You promised to be here." "I know, son. I'm sorry. There was an emergency at work and—" "Always work," Nathan interrupted, his voice rising even higher. "Like Mom, you'll leave too." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. Being compared to Melissa, accused of the same fundamental failure, abandonment, was more than he could bear. "Nathan, I would never—" he began, but Jessica stopped him with a touch on his arm. "Not now," she whispered. "He can't process explanations in this state. We need to calm him first." Richard nodded, feeling utterly inadequate. He watched as Jessica guided Nathan through breathing exercises, offered his favorite weighted blanket, and gradually led him back to a calmer state. Her competence, in contrast to his own helplessness, only heightened his sense of failure. When Nathan finally fell asleep nearly 2 hours later, Richard and Jessica found themselves in the kitchen, both emotionally and physically drained. "He's right," Richard said, breaking the heavy silence. "I'm doing exactly what Melissa did, putting other things ahead of him." "That's not true," Jessica protested, though her tone wasn't entirely convincing. "You're trying to save your company. It's different." "Is it?" Richard asked bitterly. "Nathan doesn't see a difference. All he knows is that once again I'm not there when I promised I would be." Jessica sighed, taking a sip of her tea. "What's going on, Richard? At the company, I mean. You've been more absent, more worried. It's affecting Nathan, and you too." Richard rubbed his face with his hands, suddenly looking older. "It's as if someone is deliberately sabotaging Thompson Construction. We've lost 3 major contracts in 2 weeks. There are damaging rumors circulating among investors. Nothing we can prove, but do you think it's that Maxwell Carter, the man mentioned at the hearing?" "I'm almost certain, and Melissa is probably involved too. She always knew the company's weak points. She was by my side when we built it." A thoughtful silence fell between them. "You need to decide what's more important, Richard," Jessica said finally, her voice soft but firm. "And be honest with yourself. If it's the company, that's fine. But then we need to rethink arrangements for Nathan. Maybe hire more help. Create a system that doesn't rely so much on promises you can't keep." Her words, though gentle, carried an implicit criticism that Richard felt deeply. "You think I'm choosing the company over my son?" he said, a statement, not a question. "I'm saying it seems like you're trying to save both at the same time, and it's tearing you apart," Jessica replied. "And in the process, Nathan is getting hurt." Richard stood abruptly, a sudden irrational anger taking hold. "You don't understand. You can't understand. Thompson Construction isn't just a company to me. It's my father's legacy. It's what I'm supposed to pass down to Nathan one day. If I lose that, what's left?" Jessica also stood, her face flushed with restrained emotion. "You are, Richard. Your relationship with your son is what's left. That's what truly matters to him. Not a company, not a mansion, not money. Just you, present and engaged in his life." "Easy for you to say," Richard snapped, knowing he was being unfair but unable to hold back the words. "You've never built anything that big, never had that kind of responsibility. You don't know what it's like to have hundreds of employees depending on your decisions." Jessica's expression hardened. "No, I just gave up my career, my dreams, everything, to raise my son alone. Clearly, I know nothing about sacrifice or responsibility." She turned to leave the kitchen, but Richard stopped her, gripping her arm. "Jessica, I'm sorry." "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," she interrupted, pulling her arm free. "You're under pressure, I get that, but I'm not your punching bag, Richard. And more importantly, neither is Nathan." With that, she walked out, leaving him alone, with his conflicted thoughts and a growing sense that once again, he was failing the most important people in his life. The next morning, The mood in the mansion was tense. Jessica and Richard barely exchanged words over breakfast, communicating only when necessary for Nathan and Tyler's sake. The boys, sensitive to the adults' emotions, were unusually quiet, casting worried glances at both of them. As Richard was about to leave for the office, Jessica intercepted him in the foyer. "Today is Melissa's visitation day," she reminded him, her tone strictly professional. "Will you be home?" Richard closed his eyes briefly, realizing he had completely forgotten. He had a crucial meeting with the company's board, one that could determine the future of Thompson Construction. "I can't," he admitted. "There's an emergency at the company. The board is threatening to remove me if we don't resolve the crisis immediately." Jessica nodded, her face a mask of neutrality. "I understand. I'll handle the supervision then." "Jessica, about last night—" "Not now, Richard," she interrupted, glancing meaningfully at the children who were having breakfast in the adjacent dining room. "We have responsibilities right now. We can discuss our disagreements later." Richard wanted to insist, to say how deeply he regretted his harsh words, that he was just scared of losing his company, yes, but also of the feelings he had been developing for her. He wanted to explain how terrifying it was, after Melissa, to allow himself to trust someone again, especially someone Nathan had grown so attached to. But she was right. This wasn't the time. With a resigned nod, he left, promising himself he would do everything to return in time to at least see the end of Melissa's visit. The board meeting was as brutal as Richard had expected. Seated at the head of the long dark wood table, he faced the stern, worried expressions of the other directors as they detailed the extent of the damage. A 30% drop in stock value in a month. Cancelled contracts representing nearly 20% of projected annual revenue. Preliminary investigations by regulators based on anonymous complaints. "We need to be realistic, Richard," said William Stewart, the longest-serving board member and a friend of his father. "Thompson is in free fall. If we don't take drastic measures now, there may be no company left to save in 6 months." "What measures do you suggest?" Richard asked, though he already suspected the answer. "The merger offer from Carter Development," William replied, confirming his fears. "Maxwell Carter has proposed acquiring 40% of Thompson with an immediate capital injection and a guarantee to maintain key contracts." "A hostile takeover disguised as a rescue," Richard countered bitterly. "Carter is behind all of this. He's deliberately sabotaging our company to force this situation." "Even if that's true, we have no way to prove it," another director interjected. "And frankly, motives matter less than the current reality. We need this deal, or we'll start laying off employees as early as next month." Richard looked around the table, seeing determination on nearly every face. He realized a decision had already been made before he even entered the room. The board had turned against him. "I need time," he said, struggling to maintain his composure. "Just a few days to explore alternatives." After tense negotiations, the board agreed to delay the final decision by 72 hours, an almost impossible deadline, but it was all Richard could secure. He left the meeting feeling the weight of his family's empire on his shoulders, the responsibility for hundreds of families who depended on Thompson for their livelihoods. When he arrived home, it was past 7 in the evening. Melissa's visitation, scheduled for 4, had surely ended by now. He stepped inside quietly, expecting to find the house calm, with the children possibly getting ready for bed. Instead, he found the foyer empty, an eerie silence filling the mansion. No sounds of children playing, no television, no clatter of dishes from the kitchen. "Jessica," he called, an inexplicable chill running down his spine. "Nathan, Tyler." James, the butler, appeared from the kitchen, his usually impassive face now marked with worry. "Mr. Thompson, you're back. Where is everyone?" The butler hesitated, a rare sign of uncertainty. "Ms. Melissa came for the scheduled visit. Ms. Jessica supervised, as always. But then there was an argument. I couldn't hear everything, but it got quite heated. Afterward, Ms. Melissa left with young Nathan, saying they were going for ice cream. Ms. Jessica tried to stop her, but Ms. Melissa showed some kind of document." Richard felt his blood run cold. "And they didn't return?" "No, sir. Ms. Jessica..." was very distressed. She called you several times but couldn't get through. Richard realized with horror that he'd left his phone on silent during the meeting and hadn't checked it afterward. Where is Jessica now? She went out to look for them, sir. Young Tyler is with the housekeeper in his room, very upset by the whole situation. Richard was already dialing Jessica's number when she herself walked through the front door, alone and looking devastated. Jessica? What happened? Where's Nathan? She looked at him, her eyes red from crying and exhaustion. Melissa took him, Richard. She showed up with an emergency document signed by a judge, granting her temporary custody. She said you'd agreed that it was part of a new arrangement. What? That's absurd. I knew it was a lie, Jessica continued, her voice trembling. I tried to stop her, but she threatened to call the police, claiming I was obstructing. Say a court order. Nathan was scared by the argument, and in the end, he went with her. Richard felt his legs weaken. He leaned against the nearest wall, trying to process what he was hearing. How did she get that order? Without a hearing, without notifying me? I don't know, but we need to act fast, Jessica said, regaining some composure. I called a lawyer. He's on his way here. I also went to Melissa's house, but the security guard said they weren't there. Richard pulled his phone from his pocket with shaky hands, dialing Melissa's number. The call went straight to voicemail. Where could she have taken him? He asked, more to himself than to Jessica. At that moment, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number, but the content made it clear who the sender was. Richard, we each have what the other wants. You have Thompson Construction, I have Nathan. How about we discuss a deal that benefits everyone? Maxwell Carter expects you tomorrow at 9 a.m. in his office. Come alone and ready to be reasonable. Melissa. Richard showed the message to Jessica, who gasped in shock. They're using Nathan as a pawn in a business dispute. That's monstrous. Typical of Melissa, Richard said, a cold fury replacing his initial panic. And probably illegal. I'll call the police. Wait, Jessica interrupted, grabbing his arm. Think about it. Doing that could scare Nathan even more. He must already be so confused and upset. A police confrontation would be traumatic. Richard knew she was right, but the thought of his son in Melissa and Maxwell's hands, two people who clearly didn't care about Nathan's well-being, was unbearable. What do you suggest then? Let's talk to your lawyer first, see what our legal options are, and in the meantime, maybe we should go to the meeting. Not to accept any deal, but to make sure Nathan is okay. Richard looked at her with gratitude and admiration. Even after their argument, even after his harsh words, she was still there, putting Nathan first. Jessica, about last night, I was an idiot. You were right about everything. That doesn't matter now, she replied, though her expression softened slightly. What matters is bringing Nathan back home, safe. Richard's lawyer arrived minutes later, and together they devised a plan. Legally, the situation was clear. Even if Melissa had somehow obtained an emergency order, something highly questionable that would be investigated, using Nathan as leverage in a business negotiation was not only unethical, but potentially criminal. However, confronting them directly with the police could put Nathan in an even more stressful situation. They decided Richard would go to the meeting, equipped with a hidden recording device to document any admission of extortion. Meanwhile, the lawyer would work to overturn the supposed court order and obtain a warrant for Nathan's immediate return. Jessica insisted on accompanying Richard near the meeting location, waiting outside in case Nathan needed a comforting presence. Richard agreed, deeply grateful for her strength and clarity at a time when he himself felt on the verge of collapse. That night, neither of them could sleep. Sitting in the living room, drinking coffee after coffee, they discussed every possibility, every scenario, every way to ensure Nathan's safety. At some point, as the sky began to lighten, Jessica broke the cycle of strategic planning with an unexpected question. What do you really want, Richard? Besides getting Nathan back, of course. Richard looked at her, confused. What do you mean? This crisis with the company? What do you really want to happen? If you could choose any outcome, what would it be? Richard fell silent for a long moment, considering the question, one he realized he hadn't truly asked himself. He'd been so busy reacting, fighting, trying to save everything, that he hadn't stopped to reflect on what really mattered to him. He began slowly, discovering the truth as he spoke. I want to do the right thing, for my father's memory, for the employees at Thompson Construction. But mostly, I want to do right by Nathan, and by us. He looked at Jessica, finally allowing himself to admit what he'd been feeling. By us? Jessica, these past few weeks you and Tyler have become family. The way you understand Nathan, how you accept him exactly as he is, the way you challenge me, make me want to be better. I never thought I'd feel this again after Melissa. Trust, connection, the sense that I'm not alone in this journey. Jessica stared at him with wide eyes, surprise evident on her face. Richard, You don't have to say anything, he interrupted gently. I know the timing is terrible. We're in the middle of a crisis and there's so much at stake. But almost losing Nathan today made me realize I'm also afraid of losing you, both of you. And whatever happens tomorrow with the company, with Melissa, I want you to know you and Tyler have a place here. With me and Nathan, if you want it. Jessica reached out, gently touching his hand. Let's get Nathan back first, she said, though her eyes revealed emotions her restrained. Words didn't express. Then we can talk about the future, all of us together. Richard nodded, squeezing her hand. Together, they prepared for the confrontation that would come at dawn. Stronger, perhaps, for having finally recognized what they were truly fighting to protect. Not just Nathan, not just the company, but the family they had, unwittingly, begun to form. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot, as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The next morning at 8:45, Richard parked his car a few blocks from the imposing building that housed the headquarters of Carter Development. Jessica was by his side, tense and determined. Remember the plan, she said, discreetly adjusting the small recording device hidden in Richard's suit jacket. Don't let them provoke you. Stay calm and focused. What if Nathan isn't there? Richard asked, voicing his greatest fear. The lawyer is already in position with the court order. Found 2 bailiffs. If Nathan isn't in the office, they'll go straight to Melissa's house with a search warrant. Richard nodded, taking a deep breath to steady himself. I'll be waiting here, Jessica continued. If you need me for any reason, just send the message we agreed on. Thank you, Jessica, for everything. She smiled, giving his hand a quick squeeze. Go get our boy. With renewed determination, Richard walked the remaining blocks and entered the building. At the reception, he announced himself as expected and was promptly escorted to the executive floor. The elevator doors opened directly into Maxwell Carter's lavish office, a space designed to intimidate, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of New York City. Maxwell stood by the window, a tall, polished man in his early 50s, wearing a calculated smile that didn't reach his eyes. Melissa sat on one of the sofas, looking nervous despite her seemingly relaxed posture. And there, quietly playing with a tablet in a far corner of the office, was Nathan. "Dad!" the boy exclaimed when he saw Richard, jumping up and running toward him. Richard knelt, hugging his son tightly, quickly checking to make sure he looked unharmed. "Hey, champ, you okay?" Nathan nodded, though his eyes were confused. "Mom said we're going on a trip, but I don't want to go. I want to go home. Where's Jessica?" "Jessica is waiting nearby," Richard replied, shooting a furious glance at Melissa. "And yes, we're going home soon." "Not so fast, Thompson," Maxwell interjected, stepping forward with his imposing presence. "We still have business to discuss." Richard stood, keeping Nathan close. "There's nothing to discuss, Carter. Using a child as a pawn in a business deal? You've sunk lower than I thought possible." Maxwell shrugged, unshaken. "Business is business, and you didn't leave me much choice. You refused all my previous offers because they were unfair and undervalued Thompson Construction." "Thompson Construction's value is in freefall, in case you haven't noticed." Maxwell smirked sarcastically. "A shame, all those cancelled contracts, those investigations. The market is so volatile." The veiled admission of sabotage would be gold for Richard's lawyers. but right now his only concern was making sure Nathan was safe. Let's cut to the chase, Carter. What exactly do you want? Maxwell walked to his desk, picking up a document. Nothing complicated. You sign this agreement, transferring 51% of Thompson Construction's shares to me at a fair price given the company's current state. In return, I guarantee a full financial rescue, keeping all jobs, including yours, though as COO, not CEO, obviously. And Nathan? Oh, as for that, Melissa cut in, standing up. Part of the deal includes shared custody. So I keep Nathan during the school year. You get him on holidays and vacations. Richard stared at them in disbelief. You're out of your minds if you think I'll agree to this. Actually, Maxwell continued, his voice dangerously soft, you will agree. Because if you don't, you won't just lose your company entirely. I already have enough board votes for removal, but you'll also face a long, messy custody battle. I imagine Nathan would find that distressing. Richard felt Nathan tense beside him, clearly sensing the hostility in the room, even without fully understanding what was happening. Dad, the boy whispered, tugging at his sleeve. I want to... Go home, please. Richard knelt down again, looking into his son's eyes. Nathan, I need you to go over to that table for just a minute while I talk to these people. Can you do that for me? I promise it'll be quick, and then we'll go straight home. The boy hesitated but nodded, returning to the corner where his tablet was. Richard turned to Maxwell and Melissa, keeping his voice low so Nathan wouldn't hear. What you've done is kidnapping, extortion. I have a court order ready outside and officers waiting for my signal. Maxwell laughed, though Richard noticed a flicker of worry in his eyes. Bluffing, you wouldn't risk a scandal that would further damage Thompson Construction. Test me, Richard challenged. Some things are more important than business, Carter. My son is one of them. Melissa, suddenly nervous, stepped closer. Richard, be reasonable. No one's hurting Nathan. He was perfectly fine with me last night. Maybe he'd even enjoy spending more time with his mother. The mother who called him defective, who abandoned him without looking back for 3 years? Richard shook his head in disbelief. Do you really think any judge would take your custody request seriously once they hear about this blackmail? A tense silence fell over the room. Richard could see the wheels turning in Maxwell's mind, recalculating risks, weighing options. Perhaps we can come to a more reasonable agreement, Maxwell finally suggested, his tone more cautious. The only agreement I'm willing to discuss is Nathan's safe return home, immediately. After that, if you want to talk about Thompson Construction, schedule a meeting like a decent businessman. Maxwell and Melissa exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, Melissa sighed in defeat. Take him then. You've always been so stubborn, Richard. Dad? Nathan called from the corner, his voice small and anxious. Can we go now? Yes, son, Richard replied, reaching out his hand. Let's go home. As they walked to the door, Maxwell made one last remark. This isn't over, Thompson. The board votes in 48 hours and I have the majority. Richard paused briefly, glancing over his shoulder. Do what you think you must, Carter. I'll do the same. In the elevator, Richard sent the prearranged message to Jessica, letting her know he had Nathan and that everything had gone smoothly. When they stepped out of the building, she was already waiting on the sidewalk, her face lighting up at the sight of Nathan safe and sound. Nathan, she called, opening her arms. To the surprise and emotion of both adults, the boy ran to Jessica, hugging her tightly, a rare gesture from him, especially in public. I thought you were gone, he murmured against her blouse, like Mommy. Never, Nathan, Jessica replied, tears in her eyes. I'm never leaving. Richard watched the scene, feeling a mix of relief, gratitude, and love that nearly took his breath away. Somehow, in the midst of all this chaos, they had become a family. Unconventional, perhaps, built more by choice than by blood, but a real family nonetheless. On the drive home, Nathan fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the tension. Richard and Jessica exchanged worried glances in the rearview mirror. We should contact a child psychologist, Jessica whispered. This experience might have been traumatic for him. even if he doesn't show it right away. You're right, Richard agreed, keeping his voice low to avoid waking his son. I'll take care of it first thing tomorrow. When they arrived at the mansion, they were greeted by an anxious Tyler, who had been under the housekeeper's care. The boy ran to hug his mother and then timidly approached Nathan, who had just woken up as he entered the house. "You're back," said Tyler, a relieved smile on his face. "I was worried." Nathan, still drowsy, simply nodded but allowed Tyler to walk beside him to the kitchen where the housekeeper had prepared a snack. The children settled at the table, and for a moment, normality seemed restored. Richard pulled Jessica into the office, closing the door for privacy. "We have a serious problem," he said, his face tense. "Maxwell Carter wasn't bluffing about the board. I have 48 hours before the vote that could remove me as company president." Jessica sat down, processing the information. "What happens if they succeed?" "Maxwell takes control of Thompson Construction. Hundreds of jobs will be at risk. The social programs we implemented will likely be cut, and the legacy my father built," his voice faltered. "Everything he built from scratch, with integrity, will be corrupted." Jessica studied Richard intently, seeing beyond the business concerns to the man who feared failing his father, the employees who trusted him, and above all, his son. "What can we do?" she asked. Richard smiled weakly at the word "we," more grateful than he could express for how Jessica always stood by his side, even in matters that weren't directly her responsibility. "I don't know. The recording we have of Maxwell practically admitting to sabotage is useful, but not enough to turn things around in the short term. We'd need something more concrete, definitive proof of his schemes against Thompson Construction." Jessica furrowed her brow, thoughtful. "You mentioned once that Melissa knew all the company's weak points. Does that mean she also knew its strengths, the internal secrets?" "Yes, she was by my side when we expanded the business. She knows practically everything about operations, contracts, investors." "Then she's the key," Jessica concluded. "If we can get her to switch sides, or at least reveal what she knows about Maxwell's schemes." Richard shook his head skeptically. "Melissa would never help. She's with Maxwell on this. She's probably the one who gave him the information to start the sabotage in the first place." "Maybe," Jessica agreed. "But you said yourself Melissa is pragmatic. If she realizes their plan is falling apart, that she could face serious legal consequences for what she did to Nathan. You think we could pressure her?" "Not exactly. Pressure. Offer her a way out, a chance to leave this situation with some dignity, avoiding lawsuits and scandals." Richard considered the idea, a spark of hope beginning to flicker. "It could work. Melissa has always cared about her public image. The thought of being exposed as someone who used her own son for corporate extortion, that would terrify her." They spent the next hour crafting a strategy. While Richard contacted his lawyer to prepare for the confrontation with Melissa, Jessica made sure the children were all right, shielded from the stress the adults were facing. When night fell, the mansion was quiet. Tyler and Nathan, exhausted after the turbulent day, had gone to bed early. Richard found Jessica on the back porch, gazing at the starry sky, a cup of tea in her hands. "Thank you," he said, joining her. "For everything you did today, for everything you've done since you came into our lives." Jessica smiled softly. "You don't have to thank me. Nathan has become important to me. So have you." Richard felt his heart race at her simple yet meaningful words. "In the middle of all this chaos, something good happened," he said, gathering the courage to voice what he'd been feeling. "We found each other." Jessica turned to face him, vulnerability clear in her eyes. "Richard, At that moment, his phone rang, interrupting the moment. Richard answered with an apologetic expression. It was his lawyer with urgent news. He had discovered that Maxwell and Melissa planned to meet that very night at an exclusive restaurant to finalize the details of their strategy against Thompson Construction. "This is our chance," Richard told Jessica after hanging up. "We can confront them together, away from the children, in a public place where they won't be able to make a scene." "I'll call the housekeeper to stay with the boys," Jessica replied promptly. 30 minutes later, they were on their way to the Skyline, one of the most exclusive and discreet restaurants in New York City, frequented by the business elite. Richard's lawyer, Mr. Daniel Robertson, met them at the entrance. "They're at a table in the back, in the private section," he informed them. "They've been there nearly an hour, probably discussing the final details before the board vote." "Do you have the documents?" Richard asked. The lawyer nodded, handing him a folder. "Everything's here. The transcribed recording from Maxwell's office, the forged court order Melissa used to take Nathan, and the draft of the settlement we're proposing." Richard took a deep breath, looking at Jessica. "Ready?" She nodded firmly. "Let's bring some justice to this story." They entered the restaurant, Richard leading the way, Jessica and the lawyer close behind. The maitre d' tried to intercept, them explaining that the private section was for specific guests only. But Richard simply ignored him, striding purposefully toward the back. There sat Maxwell and Melissa, leaning over the table, speaking in hushed, urgent tones, half empty. Champagne glasses in front of them. They seemed to be celebrating their victory prematurely. "What a charming little meeting," Richard said, his voice calm but firm, startling them both. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Melissa visibly paled. Maxwell, ever composed, merely smiled, though his eyes betrayed irritation. "Richard, what an unpleasant surprise, and I see you've brought company." His gaze flicked to Jessica with disdain, then to the lawyer with caution. "Mind if we join you?" Richard asked, already pulling out a chair. "We have important matters to discuss." "Actually, we were just leaving," Melissa said quickly, starting to rise. "Stay, Melissa," Richard said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "What I have to say concerns you especially." Something in his expression made her hesitate, then reluctantly sit back down. "5 minutes, Maxwell conceded, glancing at his watch. "Then we have another appointment." Richard signaled to the lawyer, who placed the folder on the table and opened it, revealing the carefully organized documents. "This," Richard began, pointing to the transcript, "is the recording of our conversation this morning, where you practically admit to sabotaging Thompson Construction. It's not enough for criminal charges, but certainly enough for a civil case, especially with Nathan's testimony about how he was used as leverage." Maxwell's expression remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "And this," Richard continued, pointing to another document, "is the forged court order Melissa used to take Nathan yesterday. Submitting false court documents is a crime, punishable by 2 to 6 years. Melissa swallowed hard, glancing nervously at Maxwell, who stayed silent. "What do you want, Richard?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. "I want you to stop, completely. I want Maxwell to drop his schemes to take over Thompson Construction. I want you, Melissa, to withdraw any custody modification requests and acknowledge in writing that you used our son as a tool to achieve personal goals." Maxwell laughed, though the sound lacked his usual confident sneer. "And why would we do that? You said yourself the evidence is circumstantial for a criminal case." "Because the alternative is me going to the press," Richard replied simply. "Imagine the headlines. Businessman and ex-wife use autistic child as pawn in corporate dispute. Your name, your reputation, your businesses, all destroyed in the court of public opinion long before any official trial." Maxwell's face hardened. "You wouldn't do that. It would hurt Thompson Construction too." "Maybe," Richard admitted, "but there's a fundamental difference between us. Maxwell, for you everything comes down to money and power. For me," he glanced briefly at Jessica, "I've learned these past months that some things are more valuable. Far more." A tense silence fell over the table. Melissa stared at her empty plate, avoiding everyone's gaze. Maxwell seemed to be running mental calculations, weighing risks and benefits. "So what's your proposal then?" he finally asked. The lawyer slid a third document to the center of the table. "A settlement," Mr. Daniel Robertson explained. "Mr. Carter cancels any maneuvers to acquire Thompson Construction and signs a statement affirming no future interest in the company. In return, Mr. Thompson won't file a formal complaint about corporate sabotage." "What about me?" Melissa asked quietly. Jessica, who had remained silent until now, spoke for the first time. "Ms. Thompson will acknowledge in a private document that she has no interest in revisiting Nathan's custody." In exchange, there will be no legal action for using forged documents or endangering a vulnerable child. Melissa raised her eyes, looking directly at Jessica for the first time. You really care about him, don't you? About Nathan? Yes, Jessica answered simply. Just as I care about Tyler. Children aren't pieces in a game, Ms. Thompson. They're human beings with needs, feelings, and rights. Something shifted in Melissa's expression, a mask slipping, revealing rare vulnerability. I never meant to hurt him, she said softly. At first, when we got the diagnosis, I panicked. I didn't know how to be a mother to a special needs child, and Richard seemed so capable. I thought Nathan would be better off with just him. And now? Richard asked, his voice gentler. Melissa took a deep breath. Now I see I was selfish, a coward. When Maxwell approached me with this plan, I saw a chance to re-enter Nathan's life without admitting my mistakes. It was wrong. Maxwell shot her a furious look. Don't say another word, he warned. Not without our lawyer present. But Melissa seemed not to hear, her eyes fixed on Jessica. How do you do it? How do you care for an autistic child with such grace? No resentment, no self-pity. Jessica smiled gently. With love, with patience, with the understanding that being different doesn't mean being less. Tyler has taught me more about courage and perseverance than anyone I've ever known. And Nathan, he has such a rich, unique inner world. It's a privilege to catch a glimpse of it. Tears welled in Melissa's eyes, something Richard had never seen in all the years he'd known her. I want to sign the agreement, she said, surprising everyone, including Maxwell. I don't want to hurt Nathan anymore, or the company. Richard's father built. Maxwell stood abruptly. You're being emotional and foolish, he said with contempt. Think about what you're giving up. I'm thinking about what I almost threw away, Melissa replied, a new firmness in her voice. But there's a small chance that one day my son might forgive me for what I did. I won't risk that for money or status. She took the pen the lawyer offered and signed the document without hesitation. Maxwell watched them, anger and disappointment clear on his face. This isn't over, Thompson, he said, adjusting his suit jacket with an irritated tug. New York City is a small town when it comes to business. Good luck, Maxwell, Richard replied calmly. I sincerely hope you find something more meaningful to chase than someone else's empire. Maxwell left without another word, leaving a tense silence at the table. Melissa remained seated, suddenly looking lost. What happens now? She asked, quietly. Now, Richard said, you need to decide what kind of person you want to be from here on out. What kind of mother you want to be, if you even want to be one at all. Melissa nodded, a new kind of determination rising in her eyes. Can I still see Nathan sometimes? Not like before, not because of a court order, but to really get to know him? Richard and Jessica exchanged glances. It was Jessica who answered, If you're genuinely committed to this, we can work together to reintroduce you into his life in a healthy way, slowly, at his own pace. I'd like that, Melissa said, a hesitant smile on her lips. I'd like that very much. When they left the restaurant, Richard, Jessica, and Mr. Daniel Robertson felt as if a great weight had been lifted from their shoulders. The lawyer said his goodbyes, promising to finalize all the legal details the next morning. In the car on the way home, Richard took Jessica's hand. We were interrupted earlier, he said with a small smile. That's true, she replied, returning the smile. You were saying something about us meeting in the middle of chaos. It was the best thing that's happened to me in years, Jessica. You and Tyler coming into our lives changed everything, for the better. Jessica squeezed his hand. For us too, Richard. You gave us a home, security. But more importantly, you showed us that there are still good men in the world, men who take responsibility, who love unconditionally. They drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence, hands entwined, each soaking in the peace of having finally found one another, not just a romantic partner, but a true life companion, someone who understood their struggles, respected their strengths, and complemented their weaknesses. When they arrived at the mansion, the housekeeper informed them the children were still sound asleep. Richard and Jessica sat on the porch, gazing at the starry sky, sharing their dreams, their fears, their plans for the future. A future that, for the first time in a long while, seemed bright and full of possibilities. In the weeks that followed, many things changed. Maxwell Carter, true to his word, attempted a few more maneuvers against Thompson Construction, but without Melissa's inside knowledge, and with the board now aware of his sabotage attempts, his efforts were easily thwarted. Melissa, surprisingly, held up her end of the agreement. More than that, she truly began a process of self-reflection and change. She started therapy to understand her own behavior, and gradually, under Jessica's careful supervision, began building a genuine relationship with Nathan, not as the controlling mother who wanted to mold him in her image, but as an adult willing to know and accept the wonderful child he was. As for Richard and Jessica, their relationship blossomed naturally without rush, always putting the children's needs first. Tyler and Nathan, already friends, seemed delighted by their parents' growing closeness, as if they'd secretly planned it all along. 6 months after the decisive night at the restaurant, Richard surprised everyone by announcing a restructuring of Thompson Construction. The company had not only survived the hostile takeover attempt, but emerged stronger, with a new vision. Part of the profits would now be dedicated to accessibility and inclusion projects, including the construction of schools specially designed for neurodivergent children. The first of these projects would be inaugurated at a special ceremony, and the entire extended family was present. Richard and Jessica, Nathan and Tyler, even Melissa, who had genuinely gotten involved in the project, using her interior design expertise to create sensory-friendly spaces. As he watched the children cut the ribbon together, Nathan focused and serious, Tyler exuberant and excited, Richard took Jessica's hand, feeling a wave of gratitude for everything they had faced and overcome. "You know what's amazing?" he said softly. "It all started with a simple act of kindness, you calming down a boy in distress at a fancy restaurant." Jessica smiled, leaning slightly into him. "Sometimes the smallest gestures have the biggest consequences, like completely changing the lives of 5 people, Richard teased, referring to the 2 of them, the kids, and even Melissa's transformation. "Exactly," Jessica agreed. "And who knows how many more will be touched by this school, by other projects still to come." Her words sparked something in Richard, a broader vision, a greater purpose. "You know what?" he said, a new energy in his voice. "I think I've found what I really want to do with Thompson." "What?" "Turn it into a force for change, not just building structures, but building inclusive communities. Places where kids like Nathan and Tyler can grow up accepted, valued for who they are." Jessica's eyes shone. "That would be incredible, Richard. And I want you to be part of it, not just as—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "The woman I love, but as a partner in this vision. Your perspective, your experience, they're invaluable." Jessica's heart raced at the words, "the woman I love," spoken so naturally, so certainly. "I'd love that," she replied, feeling they weren't just building a relationship or even a family, but something even greater, a legacy. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Richard took Jessica for a walk through the mansion's garden, now illuminated by small lanterns strategically placed among the greenery. The sky was exceptionally starry, the temperature pleasant, a perfect New York City spring evening. "I have something to show you," he said, guiding her to a more secluded area of the garden where a tarp-covered structure awaited. "What's this?" Jessica asked, curious. With a smile, Richard removed the tarp, revealing a detailed model of a house, not an ostentatious mansion like the one they lived in, but a spacious, welcoming home with modern organic lines, clearly designed to blend with the surrounding nature. "Our home, Pam," he said simply. "If you want it, of course." Jessica studied the model in silence, taking in every detail. There were spaces clearly designed for Nathan and Tyler's specific needs. Sensory rooms, adapted study areas, even a small therapeutic pool. But there was also so much more, an art studio, a music room, an indoor garden. "It's Perfect, she whispered, moved. But I don't understand. Why build another house? This mansion is already more than enough. Richard took her hands in his. This mansion was built to impress, to showcase status. It was a symbol of Thompson Construction's success, but it was never truly a home. I want to build something new, Jessica. Something that represents who we are now, all of us. A place designed from the ground up to embrace our specific needs, our quirks, our joys. He paused, as if gathering courage. And I want to build it with you, not just the physical structure, but everything it stands for. Our life together. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. She had known so many men who promised the world and the stars, only to disappear when faced with life's real challenges. Richard was different. He wasn't offering fantasies. He was offering commitment, partnership, a shared life with all its complexities. "Are you proposing to me?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm asking for much more than that," he replied, his gaze intense. "I'm asking us to build a family, a legacy, a future. Marriage would just be one part of it if that's something you want." Jessica felt her heart overflow. This man, who had entered her life so unexpectedly, understood her like no one ever had. "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes to all of it. The house, the family, the future. And yes, I want the marriage too." Richard pulled her into an embrace, laughing and crying at the same time, as if years of tension, fear, and loneliness were finally leaving him, replaced by pure and simple joy, the joy of having found his place, his people, his true purpose. When they finally pulled apart, he took a small box from his pocket. "I waited for the right moment," he said, opening it to reveal a delicate ring, a single blue stone surrounded by small diamonds. Blue is the symbol for autism. I thought it would be fitting, since that's what brought us together. Jessica held out her hand, letting him slide the ring onto her finger. "It's beautiful," she whispered, "and perfect." They planned to tell the children the next morning over breakfast, but to their surprise, both boys seemed completely at ease with the news, as if it were just confirmation of something they already knew. "So Aunt Jessica is going to be my mum now?" Nathan asked, his voice as practical and straightforward as ever. "If that's something you'd like," Richard replied carefully. Nathan considered for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, she already acts like my mom anyway." Tyler, always more expressive, jumped from his chair to hug Richard. "Does that mean you're going to be my dad?" he asked, eyes shining. Richard felt a lump in his throat, moved by the boy's immediate acceptance. "It would be the greatest honor of my life, Tyler." Jessica watched the scene with her heart overflowing. For so long, her life had been defined by struggle, survival, sacrifice. Now suddenly it was defined by something entirely different: abundance. Not just material, though financial security was an immense relief, but an abundance of love, acceptance, possibilities. The news of the engagement spread quickly. To everyone's surprise, one of the first to call with congratulations was Melissa. "I'm happy for you," she said, and most astonishingly, she sounded genuine. "Nathan deserves a mother like Jessica." "That doesn't mean you can't still be part of his life," Richard replied, feeling it was important to say. "In a different way, perhaps, but still meaningful." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Thank you for that, Richard," Melissa finally said. "I'm trying to be better, for him and for myself too." In the months that followed, the transformation continued on multiple fronts. Construction on the new house began, with Richard and Jessica deeply involved in every detail. Thompson Construction expanded its social projects division, becoming a benchmark for inclusive construction in the United States. Tyler and Nathan, now officially brothers, developed a friendship that seemed to benefit them both. Tyler learning to be more patient and attentive, Nathan gently encouraged to step out of his comfort zone. The wedding was held in a simple ceremony in the mansion's garden, with only close friends and family in attendance. Nathan and Tyler were the ring bearers, performing their roles with adorable seriousness. To everyone's surprise, it was Nathan who insisted on giving a short speech during the reception. "Jessica helped me when I was sad at the restaurant," he said, his voice clear and steady, looking not at the crowd but at a fixed point above their heads, as was his habit. "She understands when things are too loud or too bright." She explains. Rules that don't make sense. And she makes my dad smile, that's important. There wasn't a dry eye among the guests after his simple yet deeply sincere words. The honeymoon was postponed in favor of a family honeymoon, a beach trip with the kids, in a house specially adapted for Nathan's sensory needs. It was there, watching the boys build sandcastles under the soft late afternoon sun, that Jessica shared news that would make their family even more complete. "I'm pregnant," she said with a radiant smile. "About 2 months along." Richard stared at her silently for a moment, taking in the news before scooping her into his arms and gently spinning her around. "Are you happy?" she asked when he finally set her down. "More than I can say," he replied. "But what about you? It's a lot to handle with Tyler, Nathan, the new house, the projects." Jessica placed a finger on his lips, gently quieting him. "It is a lot, yes. And it's exactly what I want. A full, rich life, with its challenges and its rewards. Our life, Richard, the one we chose to build together." They called the boys over to share the news. Tyler was immediately excited, already making plans to teach the baby everything he knew. Nathan, as always, took time to process the information, asking practical questions about where the baby would sleep and how it would affect their routine. "The baby will cry a lot," he finally said, a small crease of worry between his brows. "Babies are loud." "Yes, they are," Jessica agreed, "and we'll have to make some adjustments when he or she arrives. But we'll do it together as a family. We'll find solutions that work for everyone." Nathan considered this for a moment, then nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. "Can I pick the baby's room color?" he asked. "I want blue." "It's a calm color." "Blue is perfect," Richard agreed, exchanging an emotional glance with Jessica. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Richard and Jessica walked along the beach under the moonlight, hand in hand, hearts full. "If someone had told me a year ago that my life would change this much, I would have thought it impossible," Jessica confessed. A single waitress struggling to pay the bills, raising a child with special needs alone. "And now?" She smiled, gazing at the horizon where the sky met the sea. "Now I understand that the hardest moments of our lives might just be the prologue to something wonderful, that a simple act of kindness can set off unimaginable transformations, that families come in all shapes and sizes, built not just by blood, but by choice, by daily commitment, by love." Richard squeezed her hand, feeling like the luckiest man in the world. "Thank you for teaching me that, Jessica, for showing me that being a wealthy father has nothing to do with money or business success." "Then what does it have to do with?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "It's about being present, about truly listening, about accepting unconditionally, about building bridges when there seem to be only chasms." He paused, looking into her eyes. "It's about loving, not in spite of differences, but by embracing them, celebrating them." Jessica stepped closer, wrapping him in a hug that said everything words couldn't fully express: gratitude, admiration, commitment, and a love that had blossomed under the most unexpected circumstances, proving stronger and deeper than either of them had ever dared to dream. In the Thompson mansion, now truly a home, 2 children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved, exactly as they were. And under the stars, 2 adults who had faced their own battles walked side by side, no longer alone but united in a shared purpose, to build a future where everyone could shine in their uniqueness. A year later, the new house was complete. A physical testament to the journey they had taken. Spacious without being ostentatious, modern without being cold, it was designed with intention to meet the needs of every family member, including the newest addition, Olivia, the little girl who had arrived 6 months earlier, bringing even more light and love to the Thompson-Parker family. On moving day, Richard surprised everyone with one final gift, a discreet yet elegant plaque installed near the entrance. On it, a simple inscription, "New Beginnings Home, where differences are celebrated and every act of love counts." Jessica read the words, tears in her eyes, understanding the depth of what they had built together. It wasn't just a house. It wasn't just a family. It was a living testament that the most beautiful stories often begin in the most unexpected places, with the simplest gestures. Like a single act of kindness in a luxurious restaurant that forever changed the fate of a wealthy father and his special needs son, and the waitress who had the courage to follow her heart, never knowing she was writing the first chapter of a love story and transformation that would touch countless lives in the years to come. The end. Dear listener, I hope this story has touched your heart as deeply as it touched ours in the telling. In life, sometimes the simplest gestures are the ones with the power to change everything. Leave your like, share your feelings in the comments and subscribe to the channel for more soul-warming stories that remind us of what truly matters.